So if I pull that up, okay, so we're going to get to this example page. Okay. Now, as I understand it, I don't think this sample database is available for your local server. I think it's only available via an Atlas cluster. Okay. So I do think in order to get this down, we have to make sure we set it up as an Atlas cluster. Okay. So we're going to kind of walk through a little bit of how to set that up today. So to make sure that you have that available to you. So let's go into load sample data. That's this top link up here. That's going to bring you to a step here. Okay, and so it says prerequisites up at the top. It says the prerequisites is to use the sample data on Atlas. You need to create and load, create an Atlas cluster and load it into it. So we need to start with creating an Atlas cluster itself. Okay. Now, yesterday, hopefully you've already created an Atlas account. Has anybody here not created an Atlas account yet? Okay, good. So what you're going to do is you're going to go out to Atlas and we're going to actually log in. Okay. So MongoDB. I'm going to go over to MongoDB.com. Okay. I'm going to go to sign in because I already have an account. And it should take you a screen that's similar to this. It'll probably be a little bit different, to be honest. Okay. So up in the top left, you're going to see that there's a drop down there. Okay. So that first drop down in the top left is your organization. Okay. So that's like what team is this part of. Okay. And so that's going to kind of control, like if you needed to share this with multiple people, that kind of gives you an opportunity to create an organization or a team. Okay. So that's what's up there. If I go to view all organizations, I'm going to come to a page like this. You're going to see Ranken Technical College. Okay. So does anybody not have an organization already? First question. It's worth noting, you know, so once we're here, we're all going to have that same organization name. It's not the same organization now, because everybody actually has their own org that they created with their account. So things to note there, you know, that name is not really unique, if that makes sense. It's not really unique. So in fact, if you were to look at it, you would find out that there's a kind of a grid there. In fact, if you hover over it here, you'll see org / yada yada. There's actually the ID of the organization if you look at the link at the end of that. So you kind of see it's got a grid of some sort. Object ID. Okay. So now that we've got that organization set up, you're going to go in there underneath organization. You have then projects. Okay. I have a few different projects up here because different things I've done and worked on and the projects I have built. More than likely, you're going to either see no projects or one project. Okay. Whether you have a new project or not, I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to say new project. I'm going to call this one Mflix. Okay. So whether you have one or not, we're just going to create a new one and call it Mflix. And I'm doing that here, at least all lowercase. Okay. So create a new project, call it Mflix. Hit next. Okay. You have the option here to add more members if you needed to. So actually, I would like you to go ahead and add me to this. You can see my email up here. That's the one you want to add. Is Smith Ranken. What are your options? What are your options? Okay, so say product owner. Project owner? Project. So you should end up with 2 project owners there. So you go ahead and click Create Project. That's all we needed to do here. We just needed to add me as a project owner. So we're going to go ahead and hit Create Project. Okay. And from here, we now have basically a project is this kind of container. Okay, so a project is a place that you can work on things. So those top two layers are just an organizational thing, right? So you've got your organization and you've got a project underneath of that. So you can think of the top thing as being your company and then the specific team or piece of software that you're working on. Within that project, for free, you're allowed to have one database. Okay, you're basically allowed to have one database, or you can split that up, but it goes up to 512. So when we're doing the next project with this, you'll need to create a new project under that same org, and we're going to call it issue tracker, which maybe we should go ahead and do that already. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that while we're here. So we'll need another project in just next week. So let's go ahead and create that. So I'm going to go create new project up here. Okay, this project is going to be issue tracker. If you've already created an issue tracker project, which I think a few people did yesterday, you can use that one. But what I need you to do is add me to that one as a project owner as well. Okay, so same thing. This one's called issue tracker, and you'll create that project. So in the end, you should, in terms of your projects, you should have an issue tracker project and an Mflix tracker project with 2 users on it. So then, is everybody at that same point where you have the 2 projects now? You should have just the issue tracker project and the Mflix project. So now we're going to go into Mflix and we're going to create a cluster there. Okay, so to just kind of give you a little bit of background on this, a cluster is actually a group of database servers. Okay, so a cluster is actually 3 database servers together. That's how Atlas sets things up. So every cluster here is not just one machine, it's actually 3. It's actually running them on virtual machines. So when you see build database here, we're actually starting up 3 different virtual machines just to run that database, just so we're clear. Online. Okay. It turns out the way we're going to set them up, they're going to be hosted on AWS. Fair forewarning, you got to be careful what you pick in here because it can range from free to several $1,000s a month depending on the settings you pick. Just a fair forewarning. Okay. Huh?
So does that work? Like we accidentally selected, we just receive a charge?
I do think you have to put in a credit card. I'm not sure about that. But that's where you want to be careful what you pick. So like if you pick dedicated, you're going to get charged. Okay. Serverless is a new thing. I haven't really played with this, but it's not really for the kinds of applications that we're going to build. So what we want over here is shared. Shared meaning that these VMs that we're setting up are running on the same machine as other database servers. So it's not like our specific database server. They're shared amongst other databases. Which is part of what makes it cheap. So you'll notice here it says no credit card required versus I think that one does require a credit card. So we're going to start here. Make sure you're picking shared. I'm going to create a cluster there. Okay. And so you should see up at the top that we've got shared picked. There's a few different cloud providers here. So we got AWS, we've got Google Cloud, Azure. Basically, all three of those are what's known as kind of cloud providers, cloud hosting providers. At the moment, they're the big 3 that provide VMs, and you can run basically whatever you want on those VMs. And so they have a free tier. There's different clouds. So, obviously this one's run by Amazon, by Google, or Microsoft, depending on your company of choice. Okay. AWS at the moment is definitely the most popular of those choices, but your mileage may vary. I'm going to set this one up with AWS. It's worth noting once I pick AWS, within there, you'll see a bunch of different regions. So you can actually choose to host your database in different parts of the world. And it's as simple as just picking a different option. It really is that simple, which is amazing, okay? You don't have to go, let's say, hey, I want to set up an office in Mumbai. I can just go ahead and create a server in Mumbai. Fine, because Amazon already has servers. Cool. That's actually really, really amazing. So one of the things you'll notice and kind of watch, you'll see that there is a star for recommended. There's a little yellow money sign sort of for things that are paid, right? So if you're picking one of these regions with a yellow symbol, that's not going to be free, okay? Just so we're clear, right? So make sure when you're setting these up, you're setting up in one of the free spots. So specifically, if we're dealing with North America, which is going to be closest to us and most convenient for us, you'll see that there are two that are free, okay? There's US East 1, or there's US West 2. So one of them is in North Virginia, and the other one is in Oregon, okay? Usually you want the one that's closest to you, or at least closest to your customers, okay? Which one do you think is closest to us?
Virginia.
Probably Virginia. I mean, Virginia is not really particularly close. We're right there in the middle. But that's going to be the closer one compared to Oregon.
Well, it looks like Google has one in Iowa. Yeah, just said Iowa.
Yeah, so there's that one, central one. But I'm going to go through. I'm going to go through AWS and pick North Virginia. So that basically means when we set this up, the actual hardware that we're spinning up, the actual VMs that we're having are actually in Virginia. They're not here. Cool? Okay. So we're going to create a cluster down at the bottom. And it's going to take a little bit of time to spin up. Okay. When this finishes, it'll end up with, these three VMs will be spin up. They'll be running. You'll be able to put data into them. Initially, they won't have any data. There's going to be no collections there. There's going to be no documents, no indexes, none of that. So we need to populate it with some data. So once it builds up, what we're going to do is import this Mflix data set. Okay. Cool. So one of the reasons I had you delete your project 1, just to make sure that you didn't get a larger server accidentally. Well, that sense. One thing you should see down here, cluster tier M0 sandbox, that actually corresponds to kind of tier on AWS. And that's like, hey, it's a sandbox instance. That's the cheap, the free sort of instance that you get to kind of play around with. If this says M1 or M2, I would recommend terminating the cluster because the higher that number is, the more expensive it's going to be. Okay. Yeah, mine finished here too. All right, so what you're going to do, if you click once it's finished here, you can kind of see on my screen there's the 3 dots on the end. I'm going to go down here and click Load Sample Dataset. Load Sample Dataset. Okay, yeah, that's what I want. So go into here, click Load Sample Dataset, and we're going to click Load Sample Dataset. So it says about 350 megabytes of data that's going to load into there. And that'll take a minute or two to get done. So once this finishes, we can see the data that's in there, take a look at it. In terms of actually connecting to this cluster, what you'll want to do is follow through the instructions in the last page of the Quick Start Guide. That will show you how to get the connection string to actually connect to it. And so part of that involves, there's 2 things you have to do to be able to connect to it. You have to open up the firewall. By default, the firewall doesn't open any connections to it. So you have to say, I can connect to it through whatever IP address. And the other thing is you have to set up an actual network administrator account that you can log into, or database administrator account. So those are two pieces that you'll need to do. Just to take a quick look at that while this is running, if you go down to network access, okay, this is where we deal with the firewall. So again, the firewall by default doesn't let anything through. So if we want to let something through, we're going to say add IP address. If we don't let anything through, you can still get to it and look at the data from the Atlas website itself, but generally speaking, we want to be able to connect from somewhere. There are a few options in here. You can type in your IP address yourself if you know that. The quickest way, though, to get there is to say, hey, if I know, if I want to connect with my current IP address, I can click on that. It'll be listed here, and that will pull it. It's worth noting that your computer basically has two IP addresses, one that's internal to the Ranken network and another that the outside world sees. And in order for this to work, you actually have to use that outside external IP address that the rest of the world sees. And so you'll notice that this is maybe a different number if you know anything about IP addresses in specific. So a few things to just call to your attention, because I know you guys don't have too much networking background, but I do want to kind of show you that. If you pull up a command prompt and type in the word ipconfig, unfortunately, I can't make that all that big. That will immediately show you what your IP address is, at least locally. So my IP address on the Ranken's network is 10.206.0.39. But if another computer tried to get a hold of me there, they wouldn't be able to. That IP address is only unique and only available within Ranken's network. Okay? So if you're on another network, you're not going to be able to see that computer. So one tool that we can use, it's actually kind of hard to get what your external IP address is, and it turns out none of the network tools through the command line work with that. What you have to do is connect to another server and ask it, what does it look like my IP address is to you? So what is my IP? It's usually the place I'll go check. And if you look there, you can see here's the public IP address to the outside world. And more than likely, you're going to find out that all of us probably have the same public IP address. Probably everybody in the classroom is going to have that same number. But that's kind of one thing to understand. So like all your machines don't really, as far as the internet's concerned, have a unique IP address. Does that make sense? So in fact, if I took that IP address, the IP address that you have, and I put that in here, I think for everybody that was 121, right? You're actually going to be able to, anybody here could connect to this database server. You see that? It is a prevention. It can help narrow who can get there, but it isn't necessarily that narrow. Does that make sense? It's not narrowing it down to just one machine, right? This would be all of your machines. That's kind of a gotcha. Okay. What we generally do there from the kind of production security level is usually what we're going to do is figure out what the IP address of our web server is and only allow the web server to connect. Does that make sense? That would be when you actually set up the web server, you're going to find out what IP address it has and plug it in here. So for instance, we'll be hosting on Heroku. We pull that from Heroku and put that number here. Cool? Okay. So, or AWS or Azure or whatever, that's where you would get that. Now, the way I tend to do things, at least for testing purpose, I'm going to do the dangerous thing and say allow access from anywhere. Okay. Part of the reason I do that is because let's say you want to go home and use the same server. Well, it turns out when you go home, you're going to have a different IP address than you have right now on the Ranken network. Our IP address also isn't necessarily stable. So you might put in an IP address today, come back tomorrow, you can't connect. or come back the next day, you can't connect because your IP address has changed. So you can't assume on Ranken network or a home network that's going to be stable. And so you either every time you want to use this, you put in a new IP address, you update it constantly, or you just allow everything through. This is what I'm going to do for testing purposes. That is not recommended with the production database. If when you're hosting a real application, don't do that. But for development, for your development environment, that is really helpful. And that's the way I'm going to do that for the development environment. Just say anything. That also means me as your instructor can get into there and connect to your database without having to muck with anything. Cool. So at least as far as this course is concerned, we're just going to set up our database service this way and just say anything you get through the final. In terms of getting access to the database, you're going to go up here, up to database access. You're going to add a new user and give it a password. So there's a few different authentication methods you can use: password, certificate, AWS, IAM. These are a little bit more advanced than what I want to go through here. It's worth noting in a production environment, we're usually not doing this for them. If you're using AWS heavily, this is the better route to go. Basically, you're setting up users and AWS and stuff. But for a simple setup, we're going to start here. It's not the most secure, but it's good enough for our purposes. This, especially given that we have opened this database open to the internet, we've completely turned off the firewall, I would recommend using this auto-generate secure password to get a good secure password for this data. Cool. So I'd recommend doing that here. That's going to give you a random password like that. This is a little bit confusing. This confusion is, I've had trouble with this multiple times. These two fields look like they're both password fields. They're not really labeled. The first one's actually the username field. The second one is the password field. I've been mistaken with that a few different times when I'm working through here. So the first one, that's where we're going to put admin as the username. And so I have a random password there. You'll want to hit copy to make sure you copy your password. If you want to see what it is, you're going to hit show, and you can see it's this long, random generated password. So you'll need that actually to connect to the database. It's worth knowing there is no way to recover this. Okay, if you forget what this password is, just delete the user and recreate it. Okay, and there is no way to recover that password if you forget. So I'm going to copy that password, and I generally go ahead and save that somewhere so that I have it with the username and password. So we're going to save that. You can have a little bit of control about how much access that role has, but I generally just leave it at that same one for creating an admin like this. I'll say it can read and write to any database, and so I'm going to leave that as the default. There are other things you can do in there. I would really strongly advise you don't create users with the role of Atlas admin. Atlas admin gives you a little bit more flexibility than what you want in your application. A little bit too much power. So that's generally the one we're going to pick, is read and write to any database. It's worth noting that's constrained. Like this is constrained to that project. So like this is the Mflix project. This user will be able to read and write any database within Mflix. They won't be able to read and write any database within your issue tracker, if that makes sense. So we're going to go ahead and add that. Yeah, and basically those are the two pieces that you need. in order to actually be able to connect to your database. Is you need to set the network access to allow 000, allow anybody through, as well as creating an admin for logging in. I think this is still churning. Okay, so it says successfully loaded. If we go to browse collections here, you should see a bunch of example databases here. So there's, now that we've got this sample database, we've got Airbnb, Analytics, Geospatial, Mflix, Restaurant Supplies, etc. So you can get all those. I think previously you had to get these and set these up as separate separate clusters in order to grab them, if I remember right. So they changed the way you load that sample data a little bit. But basically what we're going to be working with for your lab is this Mflix, sample Mflix there. So if we look at what's there, we can click on the comments collection. You can see, okay, so each comment has like a name, it has an email address, there's a movie that it's associated with, there is some text in it as well as a date. Okay, so that's, you can see there, you can see the movies, you can see that there's sessions. These sessions would be login sessions. So like if your user logs into your website and then starts doing things like maybe maintaining a shopping cart, that's what that sessions collection is about. Theaters, you can see that there as well. Includes a location where each of those are, and you've got your users finally in there, including their email address and their hashed password. Okay. So this is one kind of thing to note, and we'll talk about this when we talk about users and passwords and authentication. Notice that the passwords are not plain text, right? You can't actually see the password. All we've got is a hash. Okay. Which means that actually we can't take this back and figure out what the original password was, which is good. Cool? Makes sense? So that's kind of how that database is set up. Any questions on that process, kind of getting an example database set up there? You'll have to kind of repeat the process a little bit with the issue tracker, because you'll need to get that set up as well for the next lab. For 202, you'll be using that issue tracker project. For 201, you'll be using the Mflix project. Cool? Okay. That's what I wanted to show you. That's where I wanted to get you started to make sure that you kind of understand that. So that's getting the database set up. And as far as this lab goes, 201, basically you're going to do kind of like we did with the MySQL database. You're going to write some queries to query that Mflix database, and then you're going to write some manipulations, some commands to update and insert and delete records. Cool? And so that's basically the whole lab. It's just 2 pages long like that, and that's all the information. Yeah. Yeah, so you're going to save your queries to the text file. I think I said in there, did I not? I thought I said something about how to save it. I said using the shell. Oh, did I? I guess I did not tell you how to save it. So I need to update that. Using the MongoDB shell and save them a file named o2-o2.txt. O201. Oh, yep, O201. That detail, I guess I did not include. Okay, that's been corrected. Thank you for that note. I missed that. Okay, so again, agenda for the rest of class today is you want to finish up the group exercise first. That's due today. And then this lab you'll want to start on once you finish that, and that is due on Tuesday next week.